Hi, welcome to part 3, the application, our final areas that we have to discuss. I entitled chapter 13 the final chapter. That's all there really is, because really to finally put this together, it isn't that hard when you finally understand what the message has been during this presentation. So chapter 13 is entitled The Origins of Pain and Disease. First, it reminds me of stories about the Grail, which were very popular in the Middle Ages. The Grail, you know, is the chalice that we're looking for that was used at the Last Supper, and may have even contained the blood of Christ in it from the crucifixion. Anyway, Grail also means gradient. It's the root word of the word gradient, to learn by degrees, to develop by degrees, to understand by degrees. And there's a story that was written by von Aschenbach, in the Middle Ages. And it was called Parsifal. It's a wonderful story. And in it, Parsifal does come to the Grail Castle 2 times in his experience. He finally finds the Grail twice, but the first time he doesn't recognize it because he's not developed enough. He needs critical thinking, left brain thinking, as well as intuition. So we need them both, and we need to integrate them. But it's interesting what happens here, because in the analogy, Parsifal is actually dealing with the origin of pain. Because what happens, as Parsifal discovers the Grail Castle unconsciously and walks in there, he meets the Grail King, the keeper of the Grail. And his name is King Amfortas. And he goes, "Oh, King Amfortas." Parsifal hails him and says hello to him and everything. But he never questions what's going on with the king himself. The king has a wound that will never heal. It's an eternal wound, and it's in the groin, very symbolic. But Parsifal is quickly escorted right out of the castle with a very short stay, and the castle disappears. It isn't until many years later, after developing critical thinking and compassion and kindness for others, that when he comes to the Grail Castle again, this time he says to the king, "O King Amfortas, what is the cause of your pain?" asked Parsifal, after which the Grail immediately appeared to him. Okay? Now, this above statement that I just quoted represents the many different stories about Parsifal, the actual knight who finds the Holy Grail. Parsifal, in his early journeys, finds the Grail Castle, but he is not developed enough to know where he is. He has neither compassion nor discernment. And as my lovely wife, Linda Ann Fisher Piccolo, once told me, an energy worker, you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge. And this is very true. You must be conscious. Very few healings take place unconsciously, even though they do happen out of grace. But usually there's something to be learned out of the whole experience that the person, at least at a bare minimum, has to comprehend. So Parsifal's mistake was not to have the compassion to ask, what is the origin of your pain? But it's also insightful, because unless we know the origin, unless we can acknowledge it consciously, and both us as a therapist and as a patient, we can't begin to even deal with it, because we don't know what it is. Now, the ultimate cause of all diseases is what I'd like to talk about now. And for those of you who are familiar with Edward Bach, the inventor of Bach therapies, may not be familiar with all his writings. Bach flower remedies and so forth is most popular today. But he wrote a great book called Heal Thyself, and I'm going to quote it here for you. He says that the ultimate cause of all pain and disease is a conflict between the lower self, the personality, and the higher self, our divine ego. To know the details of that conflict is what the healers, doctors, therapists of the near and distant future must begin to know. Now, I paraphrase that, but that's basically what's in his book. He also, as I paraphrase it, he said the spiritual world, and this is my words, is only an extension of the physical world from our sensory point of view. Any law of the physical world will extend flawlessly into the higher invisible universe if it is truly constructed and perceived. This is why we have to form universals to see how far they can extend into the invisible world. When we find a better one, we replace the universal with one that's closer to the greater comprehension. But without them, we'd get nowhere. This is why the postmodernists are lost. Now, Rudolf Steiner also said the same thing. Any true materialistic scientist would find, through honest science and honest integrity and with absolute objectivity, would find the truth about the spiritual world. The spiritual world would finally appear to him, at least by implication, if not explicitly. So, to sum it up, the ultimate causes of all diseases are conflicts in consciousness at some level, and most of the time it's between, if not always, the higher self and the lower self, as Edward Bacchus said. Now that's why the doctors of the future are going to have to wind up integrating what the you would call the alternative medicine practitioners are doing now. And there shouldn't be antagonism between them. I believe in an integrative approach, but there is a division there, but it's based on bias more than and fear, more than love and understanding and compassion. Now, one tool we can use is perhaps our touchstone is the psychological blockage concepts that you can find in Chinese literature and stuff. Like, you'll find a lot of people who have anger or frustration will have pains in the liver and liver problems. This is where anger can live. But as we look at the chart I created here, people full of resentment do not respond to therapy to the same degree as those patients who are forgiving, accepting, and lighthearted about their health challenges. This is so true to the Eastern traditional medicine practitioners that they relate fundamental emotions to 5 basic meridian organs. And I think this is fascinating. I found it to be very consistently true. For example, the organ meridian would be the lung meridian. People suffering from grief, sadness, or depression tend to actually have congestion and lung problems. People suffering from overworry, overthinking have spleen problems. People who have problems with hatred and cruelty and arrogance have problems in the heart. People who suffer from fear and shock have kidney problems, right where the adrenaline glands are. And people who have anger and frustration, I've already said, suffer in the liver. Now, these negative emotions can't be stopped. They must be replaced. You don't stop being anger. You don't stop your anger. You don't stop being angry. What you do is you just start being forgiving. You forget the one and do the other. You can't put them together. If you're suffering from fear and shock, you don't stop being afraid. You don't stop being in shock. You start to express gentleness and wisdom. If you're suffering from hatred, cruelty, and arrogance, you don't try to say, I'm going to stop hating. What you have to do is start experiencing joy, honor, and respect. You have to start to practice the opposites. If you have worry or overthinking, you have to start to practice justice and openness. And if you have grief or sadness and depression, you must begin to practice courage and righteousness. So you begin to practice these things. Now, I like to talk about healing in a integrated and yet parsed way of looking at it. We have natural and divine healing. Energy healing, as I quote, soft tissue mobilization and all forms of medicine therapy, visible and invisible, are expressions of natural healing. All therapies act as a stimulus by which the patient is given the opportunity to elicit in a therapeutically inspired response known as healing. Now, that's energy healing, soft tissue mobilization. However, the body-mind heals itself by a certain response. It is not the stimuli, nor the healer that actually heals the patient. This is key. What is the source of this response? The divine itself is the source of all healing. Never forget that. The one reality which underlies all things is the only healer. All healing is from the divine. This is true, whether it's natural or whether it's spiritual, mental, or transcendent, or even if you're taking medicine. The body must still respond, and the healer must be within to do so. Now, when healing takes place, because of the stimulus created by the therapist, the divine is reactive, and healing of the patient takes place. However, there are times when the divine is proactive and spontaneously heals a patient without any outward stimulus from a therapist or doctor. This is what is commonly known as divine healing proper, or spontaneous remission by the medical field. which they do not understand. Fascinating, isn't it? Now, so what we're saying is that, in one sense, all healing is divine. This is true. But just because somebody's doing energy work doesn't mean that it's hocus pocus. It's part of the physical world. The physical world extends right into the invisible world. We just don't see it. That doesn't mean it's not there, like we don't see gravity. But we got to deal with gravity whether we see it or not. So what I tried to do is come up with a model of divine healing. But my point is that sometimes when you create a stimulus as a therapist hoping for a therapeutic reaction from the person in which the divine within that person must do the healing. Some people don't respond. Either they have emotional blocks of hatred and things like that. If you've worked on enough people, you know that in your own practice. When you work on somebody who has a lot of grief, a lot of hatred, and they don't want to release it, they're not ready to go through the transformation, it blocks their healing. The divine is blocked by these negative experiences. Now, in my chart on the model of divine healing, I show here that physical and energy work is part of the natural healing world. We can do energy work as a stimulus and physical body work, and this includes surgery, chemicals, everything else that have to be done, herbal medicines, pharmaceuticals, and all this works within the energy world, even machines that project energy. Okay, but as we get into divine healing proper stands alone. It's something that is spontaneous, that we have no control over. Now, another model of divine healing is how to look at the universe in a monistic way. So a model of divine healing I've proposed is using ice, which is representative of the physical body, but ice is really in a liquid form, water, or rain, and then H2O, which you would find in the clouds, the gas H2O, which becomes rain, which becomes water, which freezes as ice. You could say that spirit, by analogy, sort of condenses. And this is how it works. So sometimes you have to work on the body to get the body to soften in order for the spirit to come through. Sometimes we need the sun to come out through the spirit to melt the water. But the point is that it's all one, spirit, soul, and body. And we all have our own little ring past knot, which is our own auric field, which no one can penetrate or nothing can enter. And it is organized by our Atma, our divine principle. Now, what I've had to learn too is that when you work on someone, or you're a healer or a doctor or a practitioner, because there's not a positive response does not mean that you failed or that you did something wrong. It's never you, really, ultimately. It's always between that other person and their higher self. Now, I like to talk about death. As I show you here, death can be a form of healing. The divine does not always respond in the way that we think it should. Many people are not healed through natural healing. This is not a failure on the part of the deity to respond, but rather an understanding of the laws of karma too divine in comprehension for the lower consciousness to grasp. Now, death can be a form of healing, since the afterlife will be greater than the one we are currently experiencing. The masters themselves do not interfere with the laws of karma, but are themselves upholders of its tenets. It does not matter so much what type of therapy you use when approaching your client, for there are many kinds and they are all effective. What matters most is the intention of your heart and the purity of your lifestyle. And that's true. In that sense, you contribute as being a good instrument or a bad instrument as far as if you're the channel. But ultimately, it is dependent on that person's inner state and their state with God and their state with their higher self. There's nothing that we can do about that. That's between them and that person. But doctors of the future are going to have, and therapists of the future, and now, therapists now do this, have to know, have to be able to tune in, have to be able to go through the transformation together with that person. And it's quite a calling. Now, what should we do on the path of enlightenment? As I say here, seek ye first the kingdom. To become one with God is to become God. Know thyself, O man, know thyself and who you are. In the esoteric words of the great master himself, but seek ye first the kingdom of God, our higher consciousness, and his righteousness, which is right living. In all these things, powers, gifts shall be added unto you automatically through grace. From the book of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 33, King James Version. It does not matter what type of therapy you use when approaching your client, for there are many kinds and they are all effective. What matters most is the intention of your heart and the purity of your lifestyle. And a lot of course, allopathic practitioners don't like that. They want to have a lifestyle that they feel is all right, and I cannot judge that. It's not for me to judge. But the purer the vehicle, the better the instrument. You wouldn't want to use a dull, rusty scalpel in surgery, and therefore you wouldn't want to have a dull, rusty mind working on you either. Now, I would like to add to this, there's no success like failure. Finally, you must, with a sincere heart, try to reach God consciousness. Of course, you will fail in every attempt in your meditations, but don't be discouraged. Do not judge these failures at all. Take heart, for after your failure, if you do not give up your practice but endure, you will come into the grace of a higher being who will lift you up unto the next step. This is how we all progress, by our own effort, which fails, but prepares us to receive the attunement to the next level by our higher self through divine grace. You see, this is how we always progress. We must make the effort with sincere heart, sincere motivation, right action, right vocation, the eight basic truths of the Buddha, the four truths, and then the eight ways of getting there. And four of them are the ones I just cited. But basically, like Buddhism and the four truths, suffering has a beginning. The beginning can be understood. The beginning of that suffering can be changed, and healing can take place. And this leads to the Eightfold Path. But what I'm trying to say here, and Muktananda said it best when he said that, it is by grace that all of us progress into higher consciousness. So all the great beings that you see out there, all these divine divas and things that you may encounter in your life's experience, if you're fortunate consciously, have all received their status through failure and grace. And it's actually by mercy and grace that we all move to the next levels. So I hope, with sincere heart, that I was able to communicate to you some of the very complex and pretty awesome truths that I've experienced and others have experienced. And I do request that you read my book, not because I care if people buy it or not, but it's a good supplement for you. And the audio part of it is also good just to listen to, because I really was just a channel for that book. A lot of it, it's all my experiences, but also I didn't write it alone. I wrote it with spiritual beings in my life. And I wish to thank Helena Petrovna Blavatsky from the spiritual realms and Dr. Rudolf Steiner for their impulses and what they've left on the earth to help me in these matters. And finally, I hope that you receive what you need out of here, and that it's touched your hearts and gives you the courage to go on and develop yourself and keep going, and knowing that you are the creator of your own reality. And I leave you again with this truth. There is no religion, no orthodox practice anywhere that is higher than truth. Thank you very much.